This happened to me a few years ago, and I've learned my lesson. Me and a group of friends from school decided to take a spring break trip since we were graduating and wanted to do something wild for a change. We settled where else but Florida. Beaches, drinks, and whatever else it brings us. We set up our plans, waiting a grueling week or so for it to come to finally head out. We got there, the hotel was great, there was a bar in the hotel, but what would be the fun in that? So we headed out, grabbed some pizza, and scouted the area for nearby bars and other interesting places. We found a bar we decided to stop in, and looks are deceiving. It was a lot smaller inside than it looked. There was a short bar on one side, a few old rickety booths, and a long table along the side with bar stools and those little touchscreen games. There were more older people in there, but we were tired and just wanted to have a good time for our first night. There were a few women who looked about our age, playing pool, so we thought we'd give it a shot. Me and two of my friends grabbed drinks and headed over to the girls. They allowed us to stay and we played a few rounds with them. It was a lot of fun, but apparently we were too loud for them, so after giving us multiple warnings, we decided to leave. It was already late, so we split from there, and I unfortunately didn't get any phone numbers. At least I have 3 more days to try. The next night was fun. The third night was where things got weird. We found a VR game cafe and hung out there for a while, had lunch, then decided we would get a couple packs of beer, a cooler, and head out to the beach. It was normal. We found a spot. One of my friends rented a surfboard and decided he would try it out. This idiot has never surfed in his life, so it was more fun for us to watch him fall over every time. There was a group of people playing beach volleyball, so after a few beers, I decided I was okay with making a fool out of myself too. I joined for a while, and then we stopped to get something to eat and more drinks since what we had wouldn't last. One of the girls offered to have us go back to her condo to continue partying, and of course, we're not passing that up. When we got there were already a few people there. That was a blast from what I remember. I know we had more shots, games, lots of stupid dares, but that's about all I remember from that night. The next morning, I woke up under a tree in the parking lot of a thrift store. The only thing I was wearing was my swim trunks, and I had a set of keys in my pocket that were not mine. My scalp also seemed really irritated, and that's when I realized my hair had been colored blue. It was coming off in my hand, so I figured it was the spray stuff, but I still don't remember any of that happening. I tried to look around and place myself, but I didn't recognize any of the buildings or street names. It doesn't help that I'm not from Florida either. So yes, I was a little concerned. The thrift store wasn't open, it seemed, so I walked across the street to a gas station to see if they could help me or at least tell me where the hell I was. The lady at the register looked annoyed, like she must be used to this kind of thing, honestly, but she was nicer than I expected. She actually told me that the hotel I was at was about 6 or 7 miles from where we were, so thankfully I was in the same state and not too far. I didn't have any money or my cell phone on me, so I couldn't call a friend, nor could I pay for anything, so I was about to be screwed. The cashier was hesitant about letting me use the store's phone, but she finally let me. I tried calling my friend. They didn't answer, so I had no choice but to start walking. It gave me some time to try and remember what happened, but I legitimately don't remember anything after the shots, and my friend trying to jump over the concrete wall in the back. My head was starting to hurt, and I was getting tired and thirsty. So I tried my luck at hitchhiking. I can't say I blame anyone for not stopping for me. Some guy in trunks and sloppy blue dyed hair, but someone finally did. It was an older lady in some beat-up pickup. I told her the best I could where I was heading. She reminded me of my grandma, so it was hard to explain I got blackout drunk and didn't know where I was. She was nervous, of course, but ultimately told me to ride in the back of the bed and she'd take me to the hotel. I got there, and thankfully, the front desk lady remembered me somehow, so she got me back into my room since I didn't have my key or ID. None of my friends were there, though, and I was just hoping they didn't end up in the same position as myself. I took a shower and got dressed, and not gonna lie, I crashed. I was exhausted, and my head was still killing me. I did, however, wake up to my friends throwing a bottle of water at me. Apparently, they made it as far as the lobby, passed out on the couches, and were told to either leave or go to their rooms if they were staying there. They then got up and went looking for me while I made my way back here. Unfortunately, the shower didn't get all the blue dye out, and they said they don't remember me ever doing that, nor did they have any clue whose keys I had. None of us drove or rented a car, and our house keys were in our suitcases. We kind of kicked back that last night to recover and try to remember what the hell happened, but we still can't. To make it even weirder, as we were checking out, the guy at the front desk said there was a note left for me, which, shockingly, was my ID wrapped in a Burger King receipt that was 2 months old with the lipstick print on it. He was able to match the name on the ID to me since the room was in my name. So overall, I lost a night that I can't remember, lost my wallet, and gained a set of keys I still have because it's now a reminder that I will never do something so dumb again.
This happened in October of 2018. It was during the time when I was working at a riding stable. This is by far the freakiest thing that has ever happened. It started off with me mucking out stalls and taking horses in and out of pastures. At around 12:30 p.m., my mom came to pick me up from work. Since I work at 8:30 a.m., I work for the morning hours, then have the rest of the day off. As I got in my van with my mom, she said that she drove past a cornfield a few streets down from the barn. What she saw while on the way to get me was a clown. I asked her what the clown looked like, and she gave me a brief description of the clown. The clown looked like Pennywise from It, the 2017 remake, my mom said. I couldn't get a clear view of it, but that's what I remember what he looked like, she added. And as soon as my mom said that, I questioned her on what street that she saw the clown at. When my mom told me that the cornfield was not far from a trail, I knew what she was talking about. The trail my mom was talking about used to be a train track so many years ago, but ever since the train track was removed, people used it for many purposes, like hiking, dog walking, dirt biking, and so much more. My mom wanted to take the trail that was by the cornfield, the one where she saw the clown, and I was going to tell her that it wasn't a good idea, but she insisted that we do and then take my dog there. My dog was a German Shepherd Golden Retriever mix, so he was about a few months old at that time. He wasn't really big, but he was always so rambunctious that we had to walk him every day. It was a pain to say the least, but it was also fun too. So my mom drove down a road that she took to drive me to and from work or riding. It was a quiet road and it never got busy. When my mom got to the cornfield where the trail was, she parked her van and me and her took the dog out. We couldn't see the clown, but I wonder if he ran off to hide or something. I didn't want to look for the clown, so we started walking down the trail. It was surrounded by trees with leaves changing colors, It was fall, which was my mom's favorite season. And as we walked down the trail, we let my dog go to run and do his own thing. After a few feet away from the van, I noticed a dirt bike on the ground. Upon getting closer, I looked to see that the bike had been there for a while. Unsure about if the bike was stolen or not, I noticed some damage done to it. The tires were slashed and the chain was broken, and the bike seat was also ripped. I looked to see if anyone was around, but I couldn't see anyone, thinking whoever left the bike was taking a piss or something. My dog was staring at something in the wilted cornfield. I then walked up to my dog and grabbed his leash to be safe, and when I took hold of the leash, I looked up at the cornfield. Winter was approaching within a few weeks, so it was normal to see most of the cornfields wilted in the area. I looked, and then I see a figure there. That was what my dog was looking at, and my mom was a couple of feet behind me, so she wasn't far behind. I can see that the figure looked like the clown that my mom saw earlier. He looked to be about 6 foot tall. He was medium built, and he did look like the clown my mom described it to me. I wasn't sure why he was standing in the wilted cornfield, but I had no idea what his plans were. And as I stared at the clown figure, it turned around to face me, and I can see that the clown had an axe in his right hand, and that was when the shit hit the fan. To the right of the clown, I can see at least 3 or 4 men dressed in black about a few feet away from the clown. I was nearly pissing myself as I wondered about why those men were here. If it was private property or something, why couldn't they just have told us to leave? The clown slowly began to walk towards me and my dog, and I almost froze in fear at that point. But suddenly, out of nowhere, there was a blood-curdling scream from somewhere in the forest. It sounded like a woman was screaming. I lost my shit right then and there, so I booked it down the way that I came with my dog, not looking back, and when I caught up with my mother, I told her to run, and we did so. Despite my mom having breathing problems, we ran all the way back towards our van, and as soon as we got to our van, we looked back to see if the clown was behind us. There was no one following us, but we didn't want to stay to find out. My mom drove down the road until we got to our hometown, looking occasionally for any vehicle that might be suspicious. And when we got back, we reported the clown incident to the police, and they went to the location where we found the clown. Shortly after that, we headed home without any hesitation. The next day, my mom got a phone call from the police when she picked me up from work, and what they said will forever send chills down my spine. My mom told me that the clown, with 3 or 4 men, were luring people down the trail we went to. They had found a few bodies of people, one of them being a 6-year-old girl. I was sickened by what the police found, knowing that those men were waiting for me, and possibly my mom and dog in the field. If my dog hadn't alerted me and my mom about the clown and his men, I wouldn't be alive today. So let this be a warning. If you see anyone wearing a clown mask in the forest or cornfield, run away from it. Don't stay with the clown if you wanna stay alive.
As a child, I did a lot of things I shouldn't have. I skipped school, smoked, drank, argued with my parents, and snuck out. I know what I did was wrong, and I don't have a reason for it either. I know now that my parents did their best though, and I understand that now, but at the time, I thought I knew what was best for me. Whenever I had fights with my parents, I would just leave. Sometimes I would end up at my friend's house, in a parking lot on a bench for a while, or even just sitting at the corner to calm down. But my favorite places to go were abandoned places. We had a lot of places that were abandoned, condemned, and just left behind. Usually my friends and I would find a place to call our own and smoke there and just hang out for several hours. This would turn up to be my plans one night after a fight with my dad. I got pissed off and stormed off to my room. I grabbed my skateboard, my little backpack, threw in some clothes, my flashlight, wallet, and a few other things to ditch for a few days. It was summer at the time, so I figured I would be out for a few days and come back home. I slipped out the back door and was on my way. I tried calling a few of my friends, and they said that they were busy or couldn't get out due to other family plans. One of my friends welcomed me over, but said it would be a few hours before they got home, so I was on my own for a few. I started riding around, thinking I could at least head in the direction of my friends and just enjoy the cooler evening breeze. En route, I decided to take a back road that basically went behind some apartments and out to the other side. While back there, I remembered one of the complexes nearby had caught fire and decided to look for it. It turns out I was off on the name, but I found the property a few blocks over. It was obviously evacuated and had boards on the windows, but it was still standing. I decided why not check it out and kill some time while I was at it. I was around 16 or 17 at the time and was a petite girl, so I could easily fit into small places. But that means I also wasn't very strong and couldn't break down boards, windows, or doors, so I had to find a more discreet way to get in. Turns out there was an emergency exit with stairs going down the side of the building, which still seemed to be intact, so I left my skateboard at the bottom, climbed up the stairs to the door, and with there just being a no trespassing sign on the door, I just opened it and went in. When I entered, I could immediately smell the remnants of the fire. The smoky smell, burnt wood, an old building falling apart. There were several doors going down the hall. Some of the doors were opened, some of them appeared to be locked or jammed. Walking around the open rooms, you could tell where the fire was the worst. And seeing some of the items people left behind or couldn't take was kind of sad. Old clothes, pictures, children's toys. I guess it almost worked on me, thinking back to my stuff and my family and things I would have hated to lose too. I continued to walk through what I could until I got to the center stairs. I started walking down them, and when I swung around to go down the second step, I noticed a figure standing at the bottom of the stairs, and it scared the hell out of me, making me scream. But when the person didn't even budge, it scared me even more, so I just slowly backed up when he said, "Wait." His voice alone was unsettling. It sounded like the guy from Sling Blade was losing his voice. Not a good story as is, so sounding like the guy did not make me any more comfortable. I stopped with one foot on the stairs on the other side of the railing and looked at him. I waited for him to say something when he finally asked, "What are you doing on my property?" I told him I was sorry and made up a story about how my friend used to live here and that she lost something, and I thought I would look since I was in the area. He saw right through my lies and called me out on it too. I didn't know what else to do other than apologize and said I didn't mean to disrupt you or disrespect your property and would leave now. However, he stopped me again and said, "I'll make a deal with you. If you do me a favor, I'll let you go and I won't call the cops on you for breaking in." A little curious and dumb, I asked him what the favor was. He let out a chuckle and slowly started unzipping his pants. I flipped out. I quickly ran back up the stairs as this guy ran after me. I got to the door, and as I was leaving, he managed to yank me back in by my backpack. At this point, the guy was in my face, smiling, and said, "So should I call the cops?" I don't know what got over me, but I said something along the lines of, well, my friends are right outside with cameras, so if you'd like them to record what you're asking a minor to do, be my guest. Right as he started loosening his grip, my knee went straight up and he went straight down. I ran out the door quickly, down the stairs, grabbed my skateboard, and ran down the street. There was a 24-hour fitness center a little further down, so I went in and asked if I could sit in their lobby while I waited on a friend. They finally picked me up and I told them what had happened. They were impressed at how I was able to get away, but I was still freaking out inside. I didn't tell anyone where I was, not my parents nor my friend that was picking me up. If I wasn't so lucky, who knows what may have happened to me. From then on, I don't explore on my own, and I'm more aware of how much I take with me in those places as well. Travel light, pay attention to your surroundings, and tell someone where you're going to be at all times.
I was living in Japan at that time, and I went out to this club or bar one night. I meet another foreign girl there, and by the end of the night, we walked to my place together, as she had missed the last train, and I ran an Airbnb with plenty of empty rooms. While we were both visibly Western women, she didn't speak any English, but we were both fluent in Japanese, so we chose Japanese as our lingua franca. As we got out of the bar and walked down the street at 3 a.m., there is this little scrawny-looking middle-aged Japanese man in a suit. He was walking in front of us, and we quickly catch up with him as he is looking over his shoulder every so often, getting notably slower. When we get close, he turns around asking us for directions to the train station, which is kind of strange for a Japanese to ask a gaijin, or a foreigner. But then again, it was 3 a.m. and not very crowded. We explained to him that the trains don't run after midnight, something a Japanese should know, and tell him from where to best hail a cab. He quickly manages to turn the conversation around from asking for directions to admiring our level of Japanese and how truly he just wanted to talk to us when he realized that we were foreigners speaking Japanese so fluently. We thank him and try to excuse ourselves several times as he desperately tries to keep the conversation going, which goes from randomly asking directions to "I was curious about your Japanese" to starting to become somewhat clear that he had actually been at the same bar as us and already noticed us there. As we pressure to part ways, he suddenly gets very obsessed about exchanging line. That's the Asian version of WhatsApp, which I tell him that I can't do as my phone battery is dead. Again, he stops us from leaving, saying he was at least going to drop us his business card. He then proceeds to get out a wallet full to the brim with trash and random paper slips, going through every single slip several times while getting more and more nervous as he cannot find a card. This process takes him several minutes, in which he begins stuttering, sweating, and getting more and more jitterish. As my company is tired and pushing to finally be on our way, he eventually pulls out a handwritten piece of paper instead, with a username on it that he says is his Skype name and to please contact him there, while again lamenting what a shame it was that we couldn't exchange line instead. I finally managed to assure him that I'd contact him, and after awkwardly saying goodbye, he actually starts running down the street and around the corner. I chalked it off as a weird encounter and I didn't really think much of it, until somewhere that same week, my friend invites me to meet her in a town more than an hour away from where I live. We meet with someone there who lives way out in the suburbs, where there is absolutely nothing, and really only residents frequent the area, if anyone at all. We stand at a bus stop to go into town, when somebody approaches us from behind with the words, "Excuse me, Can I ask for directions?" I turned around and immediately recognized this scrawny middle-aged man with his nervy mannerisms. He seems or acts surprised, but remembers me. We get on the same bus and he sits with us. He immediately jumps on the chance to ask me for my line contacts again, stuttering, jittering, and sweating as per usual. And as soon as I give in and we exchange contacts, he jumps up and says it's his stop. He jumps out the bus and again starts running down the street and around a corner. Now this time around, I was a little bit nervous since the coincidence was extremely unbelievable. I knew he wasn't from around the area, and this far out in the suburbs was not a place tourists visited. Also, this was a completely different town where I didn't usually go, and it had been a couple of days after our first encounter. Meaning, if he had intentionally run into me there, he would have to know where I live in order to follow me out of town. After he now has my line, he proceeds to send me a wall of texts every other day, even when I hadn't answered, saying how I was the angel of giving directions, how he was incredibly lucky to meet me whenever he was lost, and how he was looking forward to seeing me again and trying desperately to arrange another meeting with me whenever he was back in town. The whole thing stopped as I eventually left the country a couple of weeks later, and after asking me twice when I would be back in Japan, Corona happened and the borders closed, so he finally stopped texting. I'm having a hard time to think of him as an actual stalker, as I just can't imagine this level of commitment from someone I have literally no connection with, other than running into him on the street at night. However, sometimes I do wonder. It was definitely a strange encounter, ranging into creepy due to his antsy behavior. Update. The borders in Japan have loosened their restrictions a little, and the stalker guy immediately texted me again to ask whether or not I am one of the foreigners that have been allowed back in. I thought I was through with him, but I guess not.
Back in the early 2000s, I worked in a gas station/rest stop that was off the highway. It was one of those stops that was in the middle of nowhere that you see as the single stop for the next 100 miles. So it was quite the drive getting there and going home, but it was also quiet for the most part. You can get some weirdos crossing the state line, but it's always nice knowing you probably won't see the same person again. Outside truckers, maybe. Sometimes my husband would come in on his days off and sit up in one of the booths reading or something while I worked. I remember this event happening in the summer because it was so hot, so I had the fans on near the front just to keep cool since I would be close to the doors. My husband wasn't feeling well, so he had stayed home, but there were two other people working. An older woman, Rosa, who worked in the kitchen area where we made the hot foods, and the other cashier, Evan. Rosa had left as we closed the food station at 9, so it was just going to be the two of us. Again, with our location and it being as late as it was, we didn't get a lot of customers. More so, it would be people coming in to buy a phone charger, use the restroom, and sleep in the parking lot. It wasn't uncommon to see cars parked, but we still kept an eye on them for our safety. On this night, Evan had just walked away to get something to eat and take a short break. I was up front, sitting behind the register, reading when a few people had walked in. By this time, it was around 11, so the first couple to walk in looked exhausted. They were looking at energy drinks and donuts, and all I could do was chuckle to myself, knowing they were going to crash soon. While they were looking around, I saw another person walk in. Because the door makes a sound when it's opened, I looked over immediately to see them, and she turned her face away quickly as she started fidgeting with her hair. It was a woman who appeared to be by herself, but she stood out to me because she was wearing a hoodie and sweatpants. Like I mentioned, it was summer and it was hot. The state I'm in is known for being hot and miserably humid, so I thought it was odd, especially because she didn't look cold. In fact, it looked like she was sweating. So maybe she was ill. She looked like she hadn't brushed her hair either, but was trying to run her fingers through it and pull it around her face. Again, we can get some oddballs, so I didn't think anything else of it other than just to watch and make sure she didn't steal anything. After walking around a few aisles, she came up and, while trying to avoid eye contact, she asked where the restrooms were. I noticed when she approached that she really didn't look well. Her face was pale, lips dry and cracked, and she was, in fact, sweating. I asked her if she was okay, and she smiled slightly, saying she was just car sick. I let it go, as it was none of my business, as long as she wasn't in danger or anything, and pointed her to the restrooms. So the restrooms are on the little diner/food side, so she had to walk towards the other side to get there. We had one of those corner mirrors hanging so we could see people coming and going from that direction, though. I watched her walk over there and head down that hall with no issues. A couple minutes later, the first couple walked up with like 6 different energy drinks and donuts and 2 bottles of water. I remember this because I teased them about the water to caffeine ratio and convinced them to buy more water. I speak from experience after all. We joked and talked for a bit about where they were from and headed, and they mentioned how they grossly underestimated how much they would spend on gas. They gave me a 10 to put towards their gas and then left. Shortly after, Evan came back from break and we started talking about the couple that came in when the phone rang. There was a phone up front that was usually only used by us employees or when management would call to ask or remind us to do something, and of course, emergencies. It was the manager calling us, asking how it was going and to check if Rosa turned off all the fryers and oven, as she had forgotten a few times before. I remember this because the kitchen is creepy when it's closed, because it gets really dark and all you can hear is the AC and heater blowers or a faint talking from the front. So what else does a lady do but ask the guy to go do it? So I stayed there and started reading again when Evan came back up in one piece, thankfully, and turned on the small TV that we had up there. It had been a few hours of us sitting, walking around, getting a customer here and there, when we had one lady walk in and again ask for the restrooms. As she started walking in the back, I remembered the lady in the hoodie because I never saw her leave. I started asking Evan if he had seen her when the woman had come running back to the front saying there was a baby in the restroom. I remember I just paused for a second to register what she said when she clarified there was a newborn in there, alone. I immediately rushed to the restrooms and in the stall was a newborn in the toilet. It looked like someone tried to cover the poor thing with toilet paper and the seat covers. I have a daughter. She's a teen now, but I remember when she was born and it being the best feeling in the world, so this made my heart drop. I immediately grabbed the baby and noticed she wasn't breathing. She was cold and almost a purple color. I took her to the sink and tried my best to run some warm water on her to clean her up and did my best with CPR. I was so worried I was going to hurt her or that I was too late, but she finally started crying. I was relieved, but still in shock as I held this baby with no sign of her mother. I picked her up and immediately ran to the front, asking Evan to grab towels from the kitchen as I grabbed the phone to call 911. When Evan came back, he looked just as confused as I did at first. I wrapped the baby up the best I could and got her to stop crying. The woman that found her said she just opened the stall and saw her in there, but there was no one else in sight. She was the only person that had asked for the restroom since the woman in the hoodie. That's when it dawned on me that she probably looked that way because she was going into labor. But if so, she left without me even seeing her. And how long was she in there? We didn't even hear someone, and believe me, labor is not a silent thing. With our location, the ambulance didn't arrive fast, but it also felt like an eternity holding this baby, trying to comfort her, knowing that one of the first faces she's seen, she may never see again. With the ambulance and police there, they took our statements, and that's when I really started feeling awful. We didn't even see the car she was in. We didn't know where she was coming from or where she was going. She could have been in a completely different state by this time. We did have cameras set up, so we did provide that footage to the police, but unfortunately, the one inside was the only one that recorded. The one of the parking lot was live and didn't save, so we didn't have car information. Before they left, the paramedic did tell me that the baby seemed fine and that I most likely saved her life. I don't know if they ever found the mom, but I hope the girl is doing okay. After that, I took a CPR class and paid more attention to my customers and their comings and goings.
When I was in elementary school, I was living with my dad. It was just me and him at home. Dad would make me breakfast at 6 a.m. every morning and then rush off to work. Most of the time, he would still be getting ready for work while he was eating. I would be left at home to get ready by myself and make my own way to school. One morning, I woke up with a terrible headache, so I figured that I wouldn't go to school that day. I didn't think it was a big deal to take a day off, because I needed to recover. I hadn't ever skipped school before, but since my dad was always home late, I didn't think that he would even realize that I had been at home all day, and I was looking forward to a relaxing day at home. I was wrong. My dad came home that day at around noon. I desperately tried to think of any kind of excuse as to why I was home. And my dad was really hot on education, and I knew that I was in for a scolding. I went downstairs to see him, and he looked at me and smiled and said, "Let's go for a walk." I was really shocked by this. I didn't give it a second thought, and I just agreed to go with him. I walked hand in hand with my father along a riverbank, and I should say that he wasn't the type to walk hand in hand with his daughter. But for some reason that day he did. I can't really remember what we were talking about that day, but I remember that I was smiling a lot. It was fun. I didn't think it was strange at that time. And after walking for a while, I felt that my dad's grip around my hand increased. I felt my little hand getting squeezed tighter and tighter. I looked up at him, and he was smiling. It was very unnerving. He then started pulling me along as he began to walk faster. Then, he started leading me down the riverbank towards the river's edge. I was a pretty tough and headstrong kid. I wasn't the type to cry, but that day I couldn't help it. My hand was hurting so much, it felt like my bones were about to break. And that wasn't the thing that made me cry, though. I cried because of the way my dad smiled at me. It wasn't normal. It was horrible. It was unnatural. I really started screaming and crying loudly, and then my dad let go of my hand. I dropped down on the seat of my pants and kept right on crying, and I couldn't bring myself to look at my dad's face. After a few minutes, someone tapped me on the shoulder and started speaking to me. It was an old woman. I didn't know who she was, but she tried to calm me down, and she was kind and gentle. I couldn't stop crying, though. My hand was throbbing, and when I looked up, I couldn't see my dad anywhere. With few options available to her, the old lady decided to take me to a nearby police box, and I thanked her for that. I didn't know where I was. I was completely lost. I hadn't ever been to that river with my dad before, and I didn't know my address correctly. All I could tell her and the officer was the name of the building that I lived in with my dad. So, we had to contact the landlord of my building. This happened a long time ago, and we didn't even have a house phone when we lived there. And once the landlord was contacted, he luckily knew where my dad worked from his tenancy documents, and then he called my dad's work. He didn't have anyone else to call, no mom on the scene, and I had no older siblings. My dad told the officers he would come and pick me up, and I started to get frightened again. When my dad arrived, I noticed something instantly. He was wearing the same clothes he left in the morning, and he always came home in his work clothes. This was not the man who tried to lead me down the riverbank. The man who did that was wearing a polo shirt and some jeans that I hadn't ever seen my dad wear before. My dad was really upset for me and worried about me, of course, but he was also furious that the landlord called his workplace. I don't know if his bosses gave him a hard time for leaving work early or something, but I quickly realized that this was my dad. I didn't need to wait to see him smile to realize that the real him was back. I really don't know what happened that day, how that guy looked so much like my dad and had access to our home. I know I was young, and I guess that you probably think that I could have made a mistake. But let me ask you this. How many times have you ever mistook your father or mother for someone else while they're holding your hand? You'd know it was them, right? I don't know what that was, but sometimes I wonder when I think about all the unsolved missing person cases out there, that something similar could have happened, and I would love to hear your theories.
When my sister and I were younger, we were left at home by ourselves a lot. My parents split up and my mom had custody of us. She worked a lot, so she would get us off to school in the morning. Then I had a key to the house to get in when we got home, because she would be working till 6 or 7. I was in 8th grade, and my sister Taylor was in 6th. 6th through 8th was middle school, so we went to the same school and rode the same bus. It was a normal routine. We'd get home, call Mom on the phone to let her know we made it, finish our homework before she got home, and then have the rest of the time to do whatever. After homework, we'd watch TV, play in our room, or sometimes call the neighbor kid over to hang out. The neighborhood was pretty great growing up. There were tons of kids around to play with, and older people that were always willing to pay you to rake their leaves or shovel snow. When we were younger, one of the ladies used to come over and watch us. I told my mom that I was old enough to handle myself and Taylor, so she slowly let me do so. She'd let me stay home if she had to take Taylor to an appointment, or let us both stay home if she had to run to the store. This school year, though, she started letting us go home alone, which has been great. She said as long as she never heard us complaining about the other when she got home and our homework was done, she'd let us continue doing this. Taylor and I always made sure to work things out before she got home, so we didn't lose such a privilege as being home alone. One day, after calling my mom, she told me she was going to be running a little behind, but that she'd call when she was on her way home. 7 o'clock rolled around and she called saying it was going to be longer than she thought, so she was going to order pizza for us. After discussing our options and arguing over toppings, the order was finally placed. She told me when they arrived, get the food, since it was already paid for and tipped, close the door and lock it again. We were not to open the door for anyone but her unless she calls and tells us someone is supposed to be coming over. So we sat watching TV and waiting when the doorbell rang. I thought nothing more than it must be the pizza guy because it was late and Mom said no one else was supposed to be coming over. To my surprise, though, when I opened the door, it was 3 guys, all wearing bandanas over the bottom part of their face and immediately rushing in and shutting the door behind them. I remember screaming and Taylor seeing everything and started crying. One of the guys tried to put his hand over my mouth, and the other one ran over to Taylor, shushing her as she tried to climb the back of the couch. She wouldn't go towards the guy, and I tried my best to keep the one by me off of me when the third guy pulled out a gun. He said if we didn't keep quiet and do what he said, he'd shoot us and wait for my mom to get home and shoot her too. Taylor started sobbing, and I tried to quiet her from the door. Once the gun guy was satisfied, he asked us where the basement was and made me lead them to it. Gun guy told the other two to take us downstairs and figure out how to secure us. We walked downstairs, Taylor still crying as he led us over to a pole behind the stairs where water drained from. I think it came from the bathroom upstairs. The other guy went through a laundry basket that was nearby, as our washer and dryer was down there, and pulled out 2 shirts to use to tie us up. He tied us back to back to the pole and knelt down in front of Taylor and whispered something about staying quiet. He told her to count to 100 in her head and they would be gone. Then he looked over to me asking if I knew if there was any jewelry or a safe in our home. I didn't know if my mom had a safe, but I didn't know she had a jewelry box, but I told him no. He stared at me for what felt like forever with a raised eyebrow and stood up in motion to the other guy. The guy that tied us up went back upstairs, and we heard a lot of stuff being moved and loud thumps. It seemed to go on for quite some time. I remember asking Taylor what number she was at, and she said she stopped counting. Can't blame her though. However, as we sat there, waiting for eternity to end, the doorbell rang. I assumed it was the pizza guy, but whomever it was, I was happy they were there. The guy downstairs looked like he just saw a ghost and didn't know what to do. He asked me if we were expecting someone, and I told him pizza. He took off up the stairs, shutting the door, so then we were in a dark and quiet basement alone. I heard a lot of what sounded like running, but no talking. We sat there for several seconds as I started to work on untying myself. Taylor had started crying again, so I was trying to quiet her so I could focus on what was happening upstairs and untying. I finally got loose and untied her as well, but told her to stay there so she looked like she was still bound. I walked up 2 or 3 stairs when I started hearing walking again and paused. Then I heard someone shout, "Hello?" And I ran back over to Taylor and crouched. I heard the footsteps getting closer and the basement door opened. Then I remembered this next part because it was one of the best feelings ever. The voice said, "Pizza is here." And I ran up the stairs to be greeted by a younger, tall, less intimidating guy in a pizza uniform, and I started crying. I yelled for Taylor to come up, and I remember unloading on this poor pizza guy. He actually got us calmed down and said he had called the cops when he saw the guys running from the house. We called our mom, but apparently she was already on her way and almost home. She had tried calling and got a busy signal, so she tried to rush home, knowing something was wrong. Once she got there, the pizza guy was talking to her about what happened with us right by her. Apparently, when they opened the door, they knocked him to the ground while the one pointed a gun in his face, telling him not to move till they left. He said he decided to come in and check if someone was hurt since someone had to have ordered food. After the cops looked around, they determined they had stolen our game console that was in my room and a couple necklaces that my mom had hanging in the bathroom. Sadly, the pizza was a casualty too, but we weren't too hungry that night. My mom did give the pizza guy a big hug and a kiss on the cheek, and we hugged him too. It was a terrifying situation, but I was thankful he was brave enough to come in and check instead of just leaving. My mom doesn't like to leave us alone anymore unless it's during the day, and the neighbors know too, so they can come check on us. I believe they did end up catching at least 2 of the guys because I remember my mom taking us to identify their faces. I hope I never have to do that again because that alone was overwhelming.
I was on a plane once and noticed that although people were still boarding, there was a large number of seats around me unoccupied. The last people on, though, were all together and consisted of one large family traveling together. There were 4 adults and about 10 children, ranging from toddler age to high school or young adult. They had the usual look of a large group traveling with children, some of whom were shy and withdrawn, and others who were running around and the adults looking frazzled, trying to keep everyone and everything together. When they have all been seated, there seemed to be some issue with the seating, as one member of their party was supposed to sit several rows back. The flight attendant apologized and said that it happens, that sometimes their computer will shuffle sequential seating and etc., but assured them that there was seating available for everyone. The family sat down, -1, and starting with the usual, that's a shame. Wish they could sit up here." Since it seemed that their party was surrounding me, I stopped the flight attendant and asked her if I could switch seats with another passenger. This caught the attention of the large group, perhaps anticipating a complaint. But the flight attendant told me no, they don't usually do that, and that everyone has been seated, but asked if there was a problem with where I was sitting. I explained to her that I was traveling solo and I didn't care where I sat, and asked if I could give my seat to the member of the family who was absent, as my seat would have put them in the midst of their group. The family overheard and was thanking me, and as I retrieved my bag overhead and followed the flight attendant to the family member's seat, she explained what was happening, and I noticed that the family member, a young girl maybe 12 years old, seemed in a hurry to get back to her family and thanked me 4 times. She practically ran up the aisle, and before I could sit down, the man who'd been sitting next to her was literally staring with his mouth open and asked, "What's the problem? No, that girl was sitting here first." That was red flag number 1. The flight attendant explained to him what was happening, and he immediately looked at me and said, "No, I don't want to sit next to him. Where's that girl going?" And she explained to him that there was no issue, and there is nothing she could do now. I think she was getting the same vibe. Now, I want to assure everyone that I'm not in the habit of judging people by their appearance, but this guy was the definition of red flags. He was overweight and paunchy, that overweight with no muscle tone look some people have. He was half bald, with a few strands combed over, thick glasses and no chin. He was a mouth breather and kept his mouth open constantly, drooling on himself then sucking it back in between heavy breathing. If there was a textbook example of a creep, it would be him. And as I was putting my bag overhead, he started talking to himself under his breath about how this was bullshit and just my luck, wasn't bothering anybody, and why did they move that girl? I wanted to say something to him, but I didn't. It wasn't long before my neighbor got a call and was talking about an upcoming court appearance, and I overheard, "No victim's testimony," and "rarely show up," and "people wouldn't ask me to babysit if I was like that." The only time that I said almost anything to him was when he started blatantly watching porn on his laptop with earphones in, grunting, sweating, wheezing, and kept repeating, "little bitch," when a part was on he evidently liked. Then he took a blanket and covered his lap, his hands fidgeting underneath it, and as soon as I saw he intended on keeping them there, I pretended to reach for the call button. Then he jerked his hands out and started muttering under his breath about me minding my own business. At some point, I got up to use the restroom, and when I returned, he was on the phone again. and I caught something about the ass on her. No, switched seats on me and got away. And he shut up as he saw me approaching. The creep went to sleep eventually and fortunately stayed asleep for the rest of the flight. When we were all deboarding, a woman I presume was the mother was standing with a girl and said, "Thank you again." And I shudder to think how he acted in that short time that she was next to him, or how he would have had she remained there. Shocking absolutely no one, including himself, he was met at the gate by security and police, and as he was being led away, he said, "This isn't my laptop, by the way."
So that, my friends, was another collection of true scary stories. But this one is special. This one was my first collaboration, and it was with Miss Creepy Tales. And I can't thank her enough for being a part of this. She has been great to talk to and wonderful to work with. And if you haven't already, please do go check out her channel. It will be in the description below. And be sure to subscribe to her. And while you're at it, if you did like this video today, please give it a thumbs up and share with me in the comments on what you thought about it. What was your favorite story? And if you haven't already, do subscribe to me as well. That way you get notifications and you can see more content like this. In the meantime, friends, I appreciate you watching today. And until next time, take care.